Today, a very, very important topic. We are going to be talking about 8 tips that I want to give you specifically about travel nursing resumes. You can obviously Google, resume tips, and there's going to be hundreds of articles, hundreds and maybe thousands of different tips you're going to read about. But as a former recruiter, I'm going to share with you the do's and don'ts that I repeatedly saw on resumes for travel nurses specifically. So today we're going to just cover the top 8. I'm going to try to keep it a semi-short video, under 10 minutes. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump in. I've got my notes here. And the very, very first one is don't worry about the format that your resume is in. Kind of a weird one, because if you do any sort of Google searching out there, one of the things you're always going to see about resumes is that you want it to look nice. You want the white space and everything to balance. You want the format to be good. So I'm of course not saying to have a crappy resume that doesn't look nice out there, but specifically for the travel nursing industry, I'm saying this because what a recruiter is going to do once they get your resume, all the recruiter in that company is going to do is take that information from your resume and they're going to put it into their own little packet. That packet's going to have their logo on it. It's got some other information that the hospital needs. So long story short, certainly make sure your resume looks nice, but the very first thing that recruiter is going to do once they see your resume is take that content off your resume and put it into their own format. Formatting, important, but don't stress over it too much there. Awesome. Number 2 is 2 references. You're going to want at least 2 references without getting too far down the path of what the Joint Commission is. Basically, suffice it to say that the Joint Commission is an organization out there that oversees travel nurse companies and recruiters to make sure quality's there, that these companies are going through the right procedures, asking the right questions of these travel nurses, just kind of protecting the industry overall. And one of these things is making sure that companies have at least 2 recent references on a travel nurse. And there's a couple requirements. There's actually 3 requirements that these minimum of 2 references need to have. So the reference needs to be recent, preferably within the last year. The second is it's got to be relevant. So if you're working on a ER or in the ER, let's say, you can't have a reference from like a med-surg unit per se. So you want to make sure there again, whatever unit you're interested in going into, is that you've got a reference from that unit as well. And then the third and final thing, one of those references at least has to be some sort of supervisor. So even I've seen charge nurses count as a supervisor, but whether it's charge nurse, supervisor, manager, whatever you want to call it, at least one of those references has to be some sort of manager. And obviously, the more references you have from managers, charges, supervisors, the better. It's only going to help you the more qualified your references are. So boom, make sure you've got those 2 references. You don't need to put on your resume, you don't need to say references available upon request. The recruiters know that. Don't worry about wasting the space. They're going to ask you for the references if they think you're qualified. If you want to be proactive, I would even recommend just including right on your resume or in the email when you send the references in your resume over, just include the references in there. So name, their title, where they're at, contact information, obviously basic stuff there, but references, very, very important. At least 2, the more the better. All right, the third is don't have any gaps in time. Here again, this one's kind of obvious, but I want you guys to be very, very specific. And here again, it works into the Joint Commission, but you can't even have 1 month off. If you stop a job in May and then start again in July, and so you took the month of June off, you can't have that gap in there in terms of as far as the Joint Commission is concerned in the travel nursing world. And these companies that you're going to be working with should know that, and they should ask you. But save them some time. In fact, they'll be very impressed if that month of June, even if you decided to take it off and spend time with family, or if you decided to travel, or if you were just looking for new opportunities, that's fine. There's no right or wrong answer. Just put on there, I realized there was a month gap here, so even if it's just 1 extra bullet point in between those 2 jobs saying, June of 2017, traveling and spending time with family. So make sure there's no gaps, even if it's simple stuff like that, make sure it's on there. All right, moving right along. 4, make sure you've got specific and relevant information. Here again, this one's kind of obvious, you'd think, but there's a lot of resumes that I'd get where a resume would have every single job that they've ever worked. So if they were a server at Applebee's or, doing some sort of student teaching on the weekend for math class of a 3rd grade, doesn't matter. Make sure the experience on there is relevant to nursing. You're only going to want to put stuff on there that's relevant to your specific unit even. So if you're an ER nurse, make sure you've got all your ER experience. Also list any sort of certifications that you've got in nursing in general. Continuing education, even some of that's good to put on there. There again, as long as it's relevant. Even stuff, if you're doing clinicals in school and you think they're relevant, maybe you're a newer nurse and don't have quite as much experience, that's fine to put your clinicals on there too. So here again, make sure to only focus on the relevant information that is in the healthcare field, or more specifically, the nursing field. Sounds obvious, but you'd be surprised at some of the resumes that we'd get as recruiters. Number 5, chronological order, and more specifically, reverse chronological order. Number of times it would be kind of frustrating where, as a recruiter, recruiters are busy, unfortunately, and they're going to fly through a lot of these resumes. So you want to make it as easy as possible for them to read your resume. And so the point here is to start with your most recent experience and put that at the top. That's where you're going to have most of their attention. That first page, that first couple lines of your resume, you're going to have their attention. They're really going to be focused on it. Make sure to put your most recent and relevant information first, and then go backwards from there. So if it's 2018, go back as many years as you need to. On the flip side of this is kind of another tip that I didn't include, so you're actually getting a bonus tip here. But if you've got more than 25 years experience, I'd say max, maybe even 20 years, don't worry about putting that on there. Your experience from 30 plus years ago. In fact, as a recruiter, a lot of times, unfortunately, if you're an older nurse, 60 years old plus, let's say, that could start to work against you a little bit. Unfortunately, in the nursing world, there's sometimes requirements to lift things and certain physical requirements. So we won't get into any of that. I didn't make the rules. I'm just telling you, sometimes if you've got too much experience on there, it can be a bad thing. So long story short, start with the most recent relevant experience and only go back, 20 years or so. Just make sure it's recent experience. All right, we got 3 more plus the bonus we just gave you. So this is tip number 6. Here again, I would think this would be an obvious one, but oh my goodness, you'd be shocked at some of the resumes that we'd get that didn't have good grammar or proper spelling. That is an immediate red flag for a recruiter if you're going through a resume and either the grammar's bad or there's just typos or misspellings all over the place. Instant red flag, because if they can't, what immediately goes through your mind is, you nurses out there, you're giving patient care. There's lives and people's health in your hands. So if you can't take the time to fill out a resume properly and fix misspellings, etc., how far over does your attention to detail transfer over into nursing? So here again, I didn't make the rules. I'm just being honest, and those were some of the conversations and talks that we'd see as recruiters if things were horribly misspelled. A very cool tip, or a very cool tool, I should say, that's out there these days is Grammarly. And that's spelled Grammarly, I believe. Grammarly, but extremely cool tool. It goes right onto your computer or your phone. It's an app. But basically, it's not only going to check your spelling, but it's going to give you tips and advice on how your grammar is, suggestions. Very cool app that I definitely recommend using. So that is Grammarly. Check that out. We got 2 more. Pretty quick and easy, I think, both of these. Number 7 is be concise. That kind of just goes back into the point that I made where if you've got 30 years experience, don't make your resume 5-6 pages long. most recruiters are pretty busy, and unfortunately they're probably going to lose some interest by page 3, 4, and 5. So make sure you put the important information on there, but make sure they're a couple pages probably tops. Ideal is a page, maybe 2. You probably don't want to be more than 3 pages long for any sort of work history. There again, if you've got more than that, don't even worry about putting it on there. Just keep it a little shorter. All right, the last tip, hopefully not an obvious one, but a very, very important one, is clean up your online presence. That's right, that means Facebook, LinkedIn. Hopefully you've got a LinkedIn profile if you consider yourself a healthcare professional. Even down as far as Twitter, Instagram, any of the other grams that are out there on social media. There's so many. Just make sure if someone searches your name, they're not going to find a bunch of pictures from your girls' trip to Cancun last spring, where there may or may not be some incriminating photos and whatnot. All in all, just make sure the info out there is not incriminating in any way. It's 2018, so you got to be careful with that stuff. But either way, guys, those were the 8 tips. If you've got specific questions for me about your resume, I'd be more than happy to take a look at it. All you got to do is email me at mike@travelnursingclassroom.com. I look forward to seeing you next week on our next video. Take care.